Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Ed Walsh with CCSP, and we've got a pretty fine presentation for you. The second of our two sessions for today. And I just need to go over a couple things with you. Some of you that were on the last call-in may have already seen this, but you're going to see polling questions throughout the presentation. If you're going to ask for CPE, you must answer those. If you're not asking for CPE, you don't have to pay attention. You attendees will be muted during the session, and we ask that you send your questions in, type them in the questions function, and we will fit them in as we can. I don't like to interrupt the presenter's train of thought, so we'll fit them in. The slide deck is available to you, as will the recording of this session. If for some reason you experience audio issues, the best thing that you might do is to call in on your cell phone. And finally, if you're requesting CPE, please send an email to me at edwalsh@csp.org. And I'm going to switch us over to Derek's screen right now so that he can take over. Derek, are you seeing that?
Yep.
That
sorry, let me trying to find the right screen here.
Yep.
How's it? Can you see it yet?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Is it the can you see my mouse moving?
Go ahead and do it again. Oh, that's my mouse.
Or I guess,
do it again.
Do you see, does it say case study 2 Aspen Ski Shack on the whole screen?
No, it's not. We're seeing part of your background, your wallpaper and your icons. That's better.
Got it. Okay. Let me see if I can pull the slideshow. Hold on.
Kids on the train.
Yeah, sorry. Hold on.
No worries. That looks better.
Okay, slideshow from beginning. Yeah. It's gonna pop. Oh, there we go. No, popped up on my other screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good right there. That's pretty readable.
I'm gonna try this one more time, and I apologize, everybody. Yeah. Click to stop screen sharing. All right. Show screen. Right. 1 second. I'm getting close here. Apologize.
That's what you get for using 3 screens.
All right. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. Sorry about that, everybody. So welcome. This is the second portion of our 4-part webinar. This is going to be the second of 2 case studies. Again, the first case study, as Eric mentioned in his presentation, was sort of beginner level, intermediate level. This one's going to be a step above that. We're going to go through a case in an actual. This was actually a client situation. Or this case study is based loosely on a client situation that we dealt with recently, and it touched a number of tax technical issues. And I remember as we were going through the study, being sort of shocked by how much tax technical this specific study was touching. And as we were going through it, I was saying, man, this would be a really nice case study to sort of go through, whether it be through a webinar or internally within CohnReznick. But a little bit about myself. I'm a principal at CohnReznick. I manage our cost segregation function. I've been in the cost recovery space for my entire professional career. And I've been at CohnReznick, I think this is my 8th year at CohnReznick. And before that, I was 11 years at Baker Tilly, working with Eric, Eric Weitzer and John Hoffman at the time. And cost recovery has been my entire life. So I'm very passionate about it. And I think that sort of understanding and having that tax technical to round out your engineering expertise is extremely important. It's going to be a differentiator for you in the marketplace. So, here's my little pitch of certified designation. I'm a certified member of the ASCSP. That forces the tax technical knowledge on you. Even the member level, that's something that I would absolutely recommend, younger cost seg professionals to get involved with. The certified member designation also is something that is going to force that tax technical and really round you out as a cost recovery expert. So that being said, let's get into this Aspen Ski Shack case study. So the taxpayer purchased the building in Aspen, and we're going to start with the facts here. Purchased a building in Aspen in January of 2017 for $5 million. At the time that the client bought the building, it was 50% occupied, 50% vacant. The occupancy was all on the first level, and it was a whiskey bar and a ski shop. And again, the second floor was vacant at the time. The taxpayer knew going into the purchase that he was going to rehab and renovate the building to his liking. It was sort of a pet project for him. His main real estate endeavors or hotels, but this was sort of unique, something that he's not really wasn't really used to, and turned out to be sort of his pet job, and it took a long time. So in April, or as far as the construction or the renovations, in April of 2017, those two tenants that I mentioned, leases expired, and the taxpayer begun construction on renovating the building. The scope of work was about $10 million, as I mentioned, in rehab spend. They replaced the roof and the windows. They converted the building from 2 stories to 3 stories. There was the idea was to have retail on the first floor. Eventually, it was a coffee shop and a bike shop that built out the space on the first floor. And then the second and third floors were all residential units. There were 6 2-story residential units that occupied those second and third levels. Construction lasted 3 years, as I mentioned. He took his time. He changed his mind a couple of times on his idea for the second and third floors. So it strung out the construction process over a 3-year period, and it was eventually placed into service in January of 2020. As we go through here, if you guys have questions or comments, I might need some help to get this to 50 minutes. So, feel free to interrupt me, and, Ed will read any questions that you guys type into the question box, and hopefully we can get those answered. So what are the cost recovery issues and opportunities for this specific fact pattern? This is what we'll go through within this deck is, what accelerated shorter asset classes are available? Personal property, land improvements. What about QUIP? Is bonus depreciation available? Do I have bonus eligibility with these assets? If so, what are the applicable bonus rates? Is this a residential asset or a non-residential real property asset? We'll go into that. The long production period. So we've got 3 years worth of development here. So, there might be some applicability as it relates to long production period property or longer production period property. We'll go into 280B a little bit in the demo versus rehabilitation rules. I'll explain shortly why that's important with this specific fact pattern. And then we'll talk about whether or not there's a repair position or a partial disposition opportunity per the TPR. So that brings us to polling question 1. What is the bonus depreciation rate for eligible assets placed into service in 2023?
Okay, it's loading and people are voting. We'll give it about 30 seconds for voting.
Okay.
Folks, if a question pops in your head, type it up, and we'll get to it. Might not get to it immediately, but we will get to it. Okay, I think we're there. %, got 16%, 80% got 79%, 60% got 5%.
Yep. So answer is 80%. Bonus rate step down for eligible assets placed into service starting in 2023. It starts the 20% annual step down until we phase out. So let's go back to our case study here. So our Aspen Ski Shack, any opportunity on the $5 million of acquisition basis. So we got any accelerated methods or deductibility related to that acquired piece. So the taxpayer, as I mentioned before, knew that they were going to manipulate the asset when they acquired it. And construction started relatively shortly after acquisition. A couple months later is when they started construction. And there's a couple of issues as it relates to the ability to identify short life assets or take partial dispositions. We'll talk about repair eligibility as it relates to the new spend, that 10 million spend on a subsequent slide. But some of the issues here as it relates to taking depreciation on short life assets is any assets that are destroyed in calendar year 2017, or I should tax year 2017, we can't take depreciation on assets that we place into service and dispose of in the same tax year. So anything that was destroyed as part of that, the work that was done in 2017, absolutely would not get any depreciation. Additionally, the taxpayer knew that they were going to put in a $10 million substantial rehab into the building, and that sort of lends itself to the thought of, hey, how much tax basis do I really have in incentivized assets that were acquired if I knew I was going to destroy them, and in fact started destroying them 3 or 4 months after I bought the property. We sort of hesitate to take a partial disposition. If you think about trying to take dispositions for the 1250 property within this fact pattern, it would be pretty challenging, right? Because we've got 3 years of construction or asset manipulation. Dispositions need to be recognized in the year that the asset's retired. So, and you need to make that disposition in the year that you can't do it in a subsequent year via a 3115, or you can't retroactively implement a partial disposition. That window closed a long time ago. Is there potential ability to take disposition as assets are destroyed throughout the 3 years of construction? Maybe or maybe not. I was not comfortable with taking partial dispositions as it relates to the destruction of the property throughout that 3 years of manipulation. I do think, to the extent that land improvements were untouched or remained original to acquisition, in 2020 when the development was placed, when that new spend, that 10 million was placed into service, to the effect that you have exterior land improvements that remain original to acquisition, I do think that there is a potential opportunity to do a land improvement analysis. I was uncomfortable assigning any personality within the acquisition basis. The fact here was that we had fairly little exterior built up space. The parking that supported the structure was on a separate plot of land that our taxpayer did not own. So we didn't have a lot of exterior 15-year land improvements that were not manipulated. So in this specific instance, there was not an opportunity to do a land improvement analysis on the acquisition. So essentially, in short, on the $5 million of acquisition basis, or building acquisition basis, I should say, the land was separate. I didn't really see a whole lot of cost recovery opportunity. We could have probably done something in the disposal space, maybe done something in the 15-year space, but I just wasn't comfortable based on the fact patterns. So now we shift to the 10 million of rehab spend. What are the opportunities, the cost recovery opportunities there? TPR, do we get to take repair deductions on any of the 10 million? So I was uncomfortable with repair positions on any of the 10 million for a number of reasons. The first reason is, you can't acquire a pre-existing condition and fix it and take a repair deduction. Or said differently, the wear and tear that triggers a repair event has to happen on your taxpayer's clock. And we started manipulating immediately or relatively immediately upon acquisition. So I was not comfortable based on that in taking a repair position. Additionally, we look at from a repair deductibility perspective, we look at the project that might have repair eligibility at a sort of macro level and say, okay, at the project level, am I going to have any repair deductions in here? And when I'm looking at how substantial the rehab is, I compare it to the basis in the unit of property. And our basis in the unit of property is $5 million. We're putting a $10 million rehab or manipulating $10 million worth of construction on that unit of property. To me, that's a way too substantial of a project to have repair deductions within it. And there's a by reason of clause within the TPR that essentially says that if you are doing something that would normally be a repair deduction, but you're doing that alongside and as part of a larger project that might be capital in character, you lose the ability to take repair deductions on what otherwise would have been a standalone repair event for a specific activity within that project. So said differently, at the project level, we didn't think that this would qualify for repair deductions, so we didn't take any of the 10 million in repair spend. Additionally, we had some potential change in use issues, right? So we acquired a commercial asset and we're building residential. Change in use kicks you out of repair eligibility in the TPR. So that leaves us with the 10 million spend with traditional regular old cost seg. And then it's, well, what potential asset classes do we have, or do our assets make up within this $10 million spend? Personal property, land improvements, residential rental property, non-residential real property, QIP. So the first issue that we needed to look at was to determine whether or not we're residential rental property or commercial property. And that's the 80% test that you guys are probably, most of you guys are probably aware of, that, income and whether or not the 1250 property is residential rental property or commercial or non-residential real property, that is determinant upon the rents from dwelling units versus the rents from commercial activity. So if your rents in a given year represent 80%, rents from dwelling units in a given year represent 80% or more of all rental income, then your asset is a 27.5 year, your 1250 property is 27.5 year residential rental property or 30 year ADS in the event that you're making a 163J election. If income derived from the leasing of dwelling units is less than 80%, or if commercial rents are more than 20%, then the building is non-residential real property, or the building assets are non-residential real property or potentially QIP, depending on your fact pattern. So in this case, with our Aspen Ski Shack, the income derived from the leasing of dwelling units only represented 55% of rental income in 2020. So in 2020, our building, when the rehab was placed into service, is non-residential real property. And that test is an annual test, and you could have changes in use that occur from year to year. You could be shifting from residential to commercial if your 80% test changes from year to year, or your distribution of rental income changes between residential and commercial from year to year. So cost recovery opportunities and QIP here. So the fact that the building is a commercial asset in 2020 is not enough to determine if our building assets are QIP, or if QIP is applicable in this case. And I'll explain here. The definition of QIP is an improvement made to the interior portion of non-residential real property after the building was first placed into service. There are exceptions. Enlargements do not count as QUIP. Elevator, escalator assets do not count as QUIP. Internal structural framework does not count as QUIP. Internal structural framework, how I define that, when I'm talking to taxpayers, is if you construct a commercial building, core and shell, it's going to be multi-tenant. Let's say it's 10 stories vertical, and you're going to have multi-tenant office occupancy there. If you have not constructed any build outs and you deliver core and shell, that's everything that you can see when you step out of the elevator lobby on a completely brand new floor that has no interior fit out yet. It's a concrete slab. You can see all the windows around the building. It's a vacant building. Nobody has built out their space yet. Most of what you're seeing is internal structural framework, girders, columns, beams, concrete floors. Those are, to me, those elements would be considered internal structural framework. Most of tenant fit out and TI activity after that would be QUIP. So what if our manipulation of our ski shack here, what if that resulted in the demolition of the original building for tax purposes under 280B? That brings us to our polling question, second polling question. Worst team in baseball, or actually maybe I should hold off for Ed here.
Yeah, it's loading and it's loading.
Okay, so worst team in baseball also happens to be my favorite baseball team. My Nats traded Soto away yesterday, generational talent, Ted Williams. We traded Ted Williams to the Cardinals, the Dodgers, or the Padres.
At least it wasn't in the NL East.
Yeah.
All right, we're there.
See enough of Max Scherzer, Bryce Harper.
Some folks are baseball. The Cardinals got 9%, the Dodgers 26%, and the Padres 65%.
Yep, shipped them out west. So
we have
NorCal.
We have a couple of questions came in.
Or I shouldn't say NorCal, but yeah. Okay, what are the questions?
Did you also address whether 50% of the units were used for a period of 30 consecutive days or less, thereby the property is commercial property?
Yeah. Okay. So right. Yeah, that's a good point. So your dwelling units, are they on a transient basis or not? If they're transient basis, then you have non-residential real property. I think that's a month long. I think it's a 30-day test. But yeah. So we did vet out whether or not these were long-term residents or whether or not these dwelling units were used on a transient basis. That's another excellent point. We were never under the impression that they were short-term sort of Airbnb type of things, and the taxpayer indicated that they were looking for long-term renters. The residential units are very high-end. He used high-end finishes on everything, and the rents on these units are pretty crazy. But that was a very good point about bringing up the length of stay and how that might impact whether or not you're residential rental property or non-residential real property. Thank you for bringing up that point.
I have another question.
Yep.
I thought the building was retained and added third floor on existing building. So why 280B? Shell walls removed?
So right. So the interior, the floor height was already high enough to handle the additional floor that was added. So all the manipulation actually was inside of the envelope of the building. When they replaced the roof, they actually did add some depth. It was like 1 foot to 2 feet of additional ceiling height. We didn't consider that to be substantial relative to the total height of the building, but we did not add an additional level above on top of the ceiling of the pre-existing building. The manipulation that added that third level was within, more or less within the original envelope of the building. And I'll sort of, I think the rest of that question will be answered as we go through the deck here. Were there any other questions, Ed?
That's it for now.
Okay. So are we a demo or are we a renovation, and why does that matter? If the 10 million rehab results in a demolition for tax purposes, then when the rehab is placed into service, that's considered a delivery of a new building. And you remember the definition of QIP, it has to be improvements to the interior portion of a building after that building was initially placed into service by somebody, right? If the interior improvements were delivered or CO'd, certificate of occupancy, retain their certificate of occupancy and were placed into service in one instance in time, and we had a demo event on the original structure, there is no QIP position. We don't have any QIP here if that's the case. We've got a brand new building. We restart the clock on the building when our 10 million was placed into service in 2020. And therefore we have no, prior building that we're manipulating interior finish to. So we had to understand whether or not this manipulation resulted in a demolition for tax purposes or a renovation. Rev Proc 9527 gives us the test for that. And the test is whether or not 75% of the original existing external walls, 75% or more of the original external walls of the building are retained in place, and 75% or more of the original internal structural framework is retained in place, then we don't have a demo event. Then it's considered a renovation, which would be helpful in our fact pattern here because that would give our initial, building placed in service state as being a prior owner, whoever and maybe prior owners before, multiple owners before. So as long as we were a rehabilitation and not a demo, then we were still okay with our QIP assets. And upon exploration with the client on this, the client provided construction drawings and factual representation from their construction manager that more than 75% of the original external walls and more than 75% of the original internal structural framework were retained in place. That test, I put that back on the taxpayer. Typically, I could look at drawings and somebody can pay me, a good amount of money to create a memo to try and, identify and isolate, that basis or understand, hey, what percentage of my walls were retained in place? That discipline is sort of separate and different than asset classification and componentizing buildings. We could do it, and I would do it, but that it would be a separate discipline of a separate engagement letter, separate memo, but I tend to sort of stay away from that test, and I put the ownership of determining whether or not that test is, satisfied or not on the taxpayer, especially taxpayers who are involved with their construction process and very, intimately involved, with that process. I let them represent to me how much of the original internal structural framework and external walls were retained in place. If I didn't think that the client had the technical expertise to provide or represent that, then I would take a different position. But this is, one of the tests that I like to try and put it back on the taxpayer if it's feasible. So because we are a renovation and not a demo event for our ski shack here, that means that most of the non-personal construction that's delivered in 2021 that's internal is going to be QIP, even the construction of my dwelling units. If those dwelling units are placed into service in 2020, I'm comfortable with the position in taking qualified improvement property on that basis. This particular taxpayer was not subjected to interest deduction limitations under 163J, so they did not make the qualified real property trade or business election, and we got a 15-year recovery on the QIP. So now we know our asset classes, right? We know we got 5-year personal property, 15-year land improvements, 15-year QIP, and 39-year non-residential rental property. So now it's, hey, do we have any bonus eligible assets in there? And if so, what are the applicable rates? We do have bonus eligible assets here. We've got personal property, land improvements, and QIP. Those are bonus eligible assets, especially, this was newly constructed. If on our acquisition piece, if there was a 15-year land improvement analysis that made sense, that 15-year land improvement would not be bonus eligible because we acquired this property before the magic date. And before the magic date, September 27th or 28th, 2017, used property was not bonus eligible. Here, per the TCJA, 100% bonus depreciation is available for eligible property that is acquired and placed into service after 9/27/2017. So for newly constructed assets, the acquisition date is considered to be when construction of a significant nature has occurred, and construction of a significant nature is defined as when the taxpayer has incurred 10% of the hard construction cost within that renovation or that rehab in this example. What we would normally do is I would go and get the pay application, the pay application through the end of September 2017 and see sort of where they were at in construction at that point. We didn't have a traditional payment application with this setup. Our taxpayer was related to the construction company and sort of tracked the cost separately. So we didn't have that pay app. So I again went back to the taxpayer and had them represent how much hard costs had been spent as of September 27, 2017. When I do this and I get this sort of factual representation from the client, I try and do it blindly. I don't give them any information that might sway their opinion or suggest that they answer it a certain way to result in a better, a more favorable tax position for them. I don't do that. I specifically don't give them any, whys as to, why I'm asking questions or reasons as to why I'm asking certain questions. So anyway, so for newly constructed assets, again, there's this 10% threshold where if you've incurred more than 10% of costs as of the magic date, your acquisition date is deemed to have been before the magic date, and you're in old PATH Act world there. If your acquisition date, or if we were less than 10% into construction as of the magic date, we would have been acquired after 9/27, which would have given us the super bonus or the 100% bonus rate on our eligible property. So for the for this ski shack, the owner represented that they were 25% into construction as of 9/27/17. So that puts us on old PATH Act rates, right? So we're 25% into construction as of the magic date. We're on old PATH Act rates. That means our personal property will be 20% bonus eligible when it was placed into service in 2020. That's because the bonus rate for PATH Act was 50% in 17, in 18 it stepped down to 40, 19 to 30, and 2020 the applicable bonus rate for assets that were acquired or contracted for before the magic date is 20%. But what about the 15-year land improvements and the QIP? Again, this is just tax technical after tax technical. It's like we'd resolve one issue and be like, oh, well, now we got to look into this. So long production period property. Long production period property allows taxpayers to utilize 50% bonus depreciation rate for acquired property prior to the magic date if that property has a recovery period of 10 years, at least 10 years. This kicks 5-year property out of being longer production property. Personal property, by definition, because its recovery period is less than 10 years, will not be long production period property. That's why we're stuck with the 20% bonus rate. The property is subjected to 263A. Property has an estimated production period exceeding 1 year and an estimated production cost of $1 million. Taxpayers into a written binding contract before 1/1/27. So based on that definition, we have more than $1 million, if we have more than $1 million in either the 15-year land improvements or the 15-year QIP buckets, then those buckets would qualify for 50% bonus eligibility, even though it was placed into service in 2020. So we apply this $1 million, we apply the $1 million test to my 15-year land improvements, which is a separate asset class from my 15-year QIP. And if either of those buckets are more than $1 million, I get 50% instead of 20%. So I'm going to summarize some of the tax technical issues and then put a bow on this. And then, if there are any questions, we can sort of, walk through them or discuss them. But in summary, our identifiable assets with a cost seg study, and the cost seg study, in my opinion, was the only cost recovery mechanism available to this taxpayer, specifically as it relates to the $10 million in rehab spend. But we've got our asset classes: 5-year personal property, 15-year land improvements, 15-year QIP, and 39-year non-residential real property. We do not have a demo event under 280B. So the building was originally placed in service by a prior taxpayer. It's a good fact for us for QIP. Commercial rents represented more than 20% or 45% in 2020, which means our building was a commercial asset in 2020, which gives us QIP on that on the interior portion. So the cost seg resulted in the following distribution of assets: $4 million in QIP. That's above $1 million. So that QIP is going to qualify as long production period property because it took 3 years and it was, over $1 million. So we'll get the 50% bonus rate on that $4 million. The $3.2 million 5-year personal property is over $1 million, but our asset class or recovery period is less than 10 years, which means we're stuck with 20% bonus depreciation on our 5-year property. Our land improvements, 15-year land improvements, have a recovery period of greater than 10 years, but our spend is less than $1 million on the land improvements. So that will not get longer production period property treatment, and will retain the 20% bonus eligibility from the PATH Act because it's not considered long production period property. The remaining $2 million out of the $10 million was non-residential real property. So applicable bonus rates, as I mentioned, 50% on the QIP, 20% on both the personal property and the land improvements for different reasons. The personal property because it's less than 10 years, land improvements because the spend was less than $1 million. There might be, I decided to apply that $1 million threshold test at the different asset class level. But there might be a position, on the $4 million of QIP, combine that with the sort of 800,000, and you're collectively over the $1 million. There might be a way to pool some of these costs, and get to $1 million in spend and get the 50% on a variety of different, on the land improvements. I wasn't comfortable with that. So, we remained conservative and used a 20% rate. I will mention that this bucket, this $3.2 million bucket of personal property. So if you think about when that personal property was acquired, there is, and I think that there's something to this. I think that there can be substantial authority in what I'm about to say, but there are schools of thought out there that create separation or space between 5-year personal property that might be acquired outside of the construction contract. So of our 3.2 million of 5-year personal property, if a portion of that was for acquired 5-year property that was not part of my general contract, then I do think you have a position to apply your acquisition date test separately to that purchased 5-year personal property. Said differently, let's say my residential units on floors 2 and 3 have an appliance package, and I didn't buy those appliances until 2018 or 2019 or 2020. I do think that you can splice out that portion of your 5-year bucket and get 100% bonus depreciation if you can prove that it was acquired to the extent that you can prove that portions of the 5-year property were acquired outside of the general contract, you know, and sort of purchased after the magic date, which would give you 100% bonus eligibility on that 5-year, on portions of that 5-year property. All right, polling question number 3.
We have a question.
Yep.
We have a question. Might as well do it before the poll. We got a couple questions. Wasn't the PATH Act bonus rate supposed to end at 30% in 2019? I didn't think it went to 20%.
I thought it did go to 20%. I didn't think that the de-escalation stopped at 30, but maybe it did. I'd have to check on that. That could be a thing. I thought it went down to 20 before it phased out.
Okay. Another question. At the starting of the presentation, you mentioned that they added new residential units. Was this building always a commercial? Was this building always a commercial, or they had existing rental units? Yeah.
So the initial fact pattern when our client bought the property in 2017, the second floor was vacant. There was nothing in there, and the first floor had the whiskey bar and the ski lodge, and the second floor was gutted and vacant. So the residential units were constructed, and maybe it had been residential at some point prior, but when the year our client bought the property, their income was derived from commercial tenants. So the property was commercial when we bought the property and placed it into service in 2017.
Another question, what about component election in context of bonus depreciation of personal property?
I think that's a little bit about what I mentioned about the ability to separate certain 5-year property from the contract, and personal property that might be tainted by being inside of the contract. I think you do have the ability, to the extent that you have separately purchased personal property outside of the contract. I do think there's a position to apply a newer, a more recent acquisition date that might get you a more favorable bonus rate. So I agree with the comment.
And the last one for now was, explain the definition of long production property.
Yeah, so in short, long production property is a property that takes more than a year to construct, and is more than $1 million in spend. And then there's some other factors, like you have to be subjected to the UNICAF rules and stuff like that. But to the extent that you got more than $1 million in spend on an asset that takes more than a year to construct, you can use the applicable bonus rate that was available when you acquired the property, or when you got to 10% into construction. You can use the depreciation rate, the more favorable depreciation rate from that earlier point in time, and lock that rate in. They did it with 100% bonus depreciation too. Very specifically around the TCJA magic date, they allowed for assets that were contracted for before that magic date and placed into service. After the magic date, they allowed you to use that 50% bonus rate from the old PATH Act rate versus having to de-escalate down. It essentially, sorry, I'm sort of rambling, but it locks you into a more favorable bonus rate that was available when you started constructing the asset versus when you delivered it a year late. The IRS did not want to punish people that took a long time, or they wanted to, provide incentives for people that might have taken a longer time to produce an asset. And I'm sorry if that's not a clear answer.
Okay, one more came in. I thought long production period property, the bonus rates could only be extended one additional year. So would the 2017 50% bonus rate be allowed to extend to 2020?
I do not know. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to go into long production period property rules. But I did not know that sort of the more favorable rate expired after a year. I've never heard of that, but it could be a thing. I mean, certainly could be a thing.
Okay, well, folks, think up other questions. We'll go ahead and do our last polling question now.
Yep. All right. So where is the conference? We going to Hawaii, Nevada, or Texas?
The surprising answer is all three. It's going to be an interesting trip.
So yeah, I guess just let me know when
Yeah,
when that's
we're
closed out.
yeah, looks like we're there.
Okay. All right.
100% out.
Nice. All right. So looking forward.
Go ahead.
So this is our last slide here. Looking forward. So just to take this a step further, in 21 we flipped to residential. He had a full year of collecting residential rents. That put him at 83% of income derived from residential units versus commercial. So we have a change in use in 2021. What that means is the remaining basis in our QIP becomes residential rental property. We have to add 12.5 years of useful life onto the remaining recovery period on that QIP. One thing that's interesting to note is that if the QIP was 100% bonus eligible in 2020, you wouldn't have any remaining basis to convert to 27.5 years in 21 when that use changes. This change in use does not require 3115. You simply tack on useful life. We're going the other direction on our 39 year. So the remaining basis in our 39-year life, we would add on 11.5 years of recovery period to that adjusted basis. Any subsequent non-personal interior improvements would not be QIP eligible as long as in years where this building is considered residential rental property. So you lose QIP. The depreciation you took on the QIP is grandfathered in. You're only manipulating the adjusted basis in the year the change in use occurs. But that's sort of taking this 1 year further in tax year 21. And this will show you what sort of happened to sort of seal this case study. So that's it. I don't know if we have time for questions, Ed.
Yeah, we do.
If there were any
Yeah,
questions.
couple minutes. I'll tell the folks one thing about the conference. We haven't made it a big announcement yet, but for anybody that's planning to come and you haven't registered yet, the current rate is the discounted rate. That's going to change as of September 1st. So, please use the remaining days of August to get your registration in and save a few bucks.
Good point, Ed. I'd also add, tomorrow we have some really intelligent folks from RSM presenting on a couple of pertinent topics. 1031 in the space. We've seen a lot of uptick in 1031 activity. There'll be a presentation on that, and then there'll be a second hour of presenting that has depreciation hot topics. So through today's two case studies and through our two additional presentations tomorrow, I think this would probably be a pretty good educational program, and maybe something that we look to do on an annual basis if it's deemed to be successful. So anyway, encourage everybody to join tomorrow. Should be some good stuff.
Yeah, it will be. Yep. So any further questions? We'll wrap it up. We've reached our 50 minutes. So anybody looking for CPE reminder, send me an email, let me know, and you'll get it fairly soon. So Derek, thanks very much. Great presentation as always, and thank you for our attendees being with us. Take care. See you tomorrow.